When neighbors were disturbed by an unusual odor emanating from the home of a 91-year-old woman, they decided to contact the police about the seemingly sweet old lady. What they discovered in her living room was truly unsettling. After numerous complaints regarding the intense foul smell, officers arrived at John Stevens' residence to conduct an investigation. As they approached the house, the stench intensified. Officers Jones and Ramirez exchanged worried glances while walking toward the porch. Ramirez knocked on the door, but there was no response. After a few moments of silence, Jones peered through the window and spotted the elderly woman sitting motionless in her chair. Driven by apprehension, they tried the door, which creaked open. As they stepped inside, an overpowering stench hit them like a wall. The once charming interior now exuded a disturbing sense of unease, shrouded in dim lighting. As they ventured further into the living room, the cluttered space initially seemed harmless, filled with old furniture, family photographs, and a bookshelf lined with dusty tomes. "Mrs. Stevens?" Jones called out, his voice tight with uncertainty, questioning why the neighbors had alerted them about the seemingly sweet old lady. Slowly, Jean Stevens turned to face the officers. Her large, unblinking eyes glimmered in the low light, and her frail body appeared to sink deeper into the oversized armchair. A faint smile crept across her weathered face, as if nothing were amiss. "Can I help you, officers?" she asked in a quiet, raspy voice. With caution, Ramirez stated, "Ma'am, your neighbors have reported a very strong smell coming from your house. We just want to make sure everything's all right." Jean's smile wavered a bit. "Oh, the odor? You shouldn't be concerned." Jones looked around the room and scowled. Their skin crawled at the sharp contrast between her calm demeanor and the oppressive smell of the place. Jones took a hesitant step farther into the room, his boots creaking on the ancient wooden floor, trying to stifle the mounting pit of dread in his gut. As they proceeded deeper into the house, the stench seemed to get stronger. It was everywhere. In the furniture, the walls, and even the air. Ramirez had a pale face, with beads of sweat developing on his brow despite the cool air outside, and Jones's head was spinning from the pungency. The stench was becoming unbearable, so Jones and Ramirez walked carefully across the living room, as though Jean Stevens knew something they didn't. She watched them with that subtle smile while remaining strangely motionless in her chair. Jones tried to remain calm as he said, "We need to search the area," his sleeve still covering his face, his eyes darting to the disorganized furnishings. Ramirez nodded and walked to the other side of the room as Jones approached the closest couch and looked around the dark room. The couch was faded and flowery, with piles of old newspapers and knitted blankets scattered throughout. Then Jones stopped. The couch felt strange, with a bump under one of the blankets, as if something big and out of place was underneath. "Ramirez," Jones said in a strained, low voice, following his gaze to the odd shape on the couch. Ramirez joined him, his eyes widening. Jones hesitated, then gently drew back the cover, his heart racing. Both officers stumbled back as the fabric pulled away, their eyes wide with terror and disbelief. This was not what they had anticipated finding. The policeman's strained, shallow gasps were the only sounds to break the icy silence that descended upon the room. What they had found in the sweet old lady's living room was chilling. Jean Stevens was well known in the small community where she had spent the majority of her life. Despite her lack of social skills, she was recognized for her kind manner and her home, which was full of old memories of her past, particularly of her late husband, James, a well-respected former military commander who had served during turbulent times. However, a strange incident occurred a few days after James's funeral. The neighbors saw a delivery truck stop in front of June's house. In and of itself, the sight wasn't odd. People frequently received deliveries. This delivery, however, was unique. The men emptying the cargo appeared to move with an odd urgency, and the vehicle was big, far too big for anything ordinary. Through June's front door came a hefty wooden crate that was unlabeled and unremarkable. Many of the neighbors observed from their windows. Their interest was aroused, but restrained by consideration for June's privacy. They wondered what on earth she could be receiving just days after her husband's death. Maybe a piece of military memorabilia. They entertained these notions, but no one confronted Jean. Things appeared to get back to normal in the days that followed. As one might anticipate from a grieving widow, Jean remained withdrawn, and her home was silent. However, after a few weeks, things started to shift. Initially faint, a weird, disagreeable odor began to emanate from her house. The first to notice it were those who lived closest to her, who assumed it might be a dead animal that had escaped detection or something as trivial as spoiled trash. At first, they did not give it much thought and spoke of it in passing. Given that Jane was an elderly woman living alone, housekeeping might have become difficult for her since her husband's death. As the years went by, Jean continued to live as peacefully as ever, though her home became less charming as it grew more overgrown with each passing season. Then, almost 10 years later, it occurred once again. The village was grieving the loss of Jane's twin sister, June, another member of the Stevens family. Although June was less well known in the community because she had spent a large portion of her life in a nearby town, the two had always been close. After the funeral, the neighbors noticed another large delivery truck arriving at Jean's house, this time under the cover of darkness. It delivered a heavy crate, and the sound of its wheels rolling over the driveway piqued the curiosity of those awake and peering through their windows. Soon, an unbearable odor returned, even more pungent than before, saturating the air and making it difficult to breathe. The overwhelming stench was impossible to ignore, and residents nearby found themselves gagging as the sour smell permeated their homes. As the discomfort became unbearable, neighbors began discussing the situation again. No one could walk past Jean's house without feeling nauseated, and the noxious scent even reached those living blocks away when the wind blew in their direction. The stench persisted day after day, seeping through closed windows and escalating from a minor annoyance to a serious problem. Unsure how to approach Jean, some suggested helping her clean, while others recommended hiring professionals, but none felt appropriate. In the end, the persistent, intolerable stink compelled them to take action. The neighbors banded together and eventually called the local police to report the problem. They were aware that something wasn't right, but they had no idea what was happening inside Jean's home. Something had to be done about the enigmatic delivery and the offensive stench. None of them realized that this choice would result in a terrifying revelation that would linger in the neighborhood for years to come. As the officers carefully lifted the tattered blankets covering the couches, they were met with a gruesome sight: the mummified bodies of Jane's late husband, James, and her twin sister, June. The officers recoiled in horror at the macabre discovery. In a twisted attempt to preserve her loved ones, Jean had meticulously maintained their bodies, regularly dousing them in expensive perfumes to mask the putrid smell of decay. For years, she had lived among the dead, desperate to hold on to their presence despite the overwhelming stench of rot. When questioned, Jean simply stated, "Death is very hard for me to take." Surprisingly, she was not prosecuted for keeping the bodies in her home. Instead, the district attorney, acknowledging her strong emotional attachment, allowed her to build a private crypt on her property. This unusual arrangement enabled Jean to keep her loved ones close, albeit in a more dignified and sanitary manner, surrounded by her carefully preserved memories. Although the neighborhood remained unsettled by this strange incident, it certainly makes for a captivating story. What are your thoughts on exhuming the bodies of loved ones to care for them at home? If you were one of Jean's neighbors, how would you have responded? We'd love to hear your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest content. Thank you for watching.